Hello and welcome to episode 47 of the Australian Roundtable Podcast on Sunday the 30th of August 2015. I'm your host John LeBon and I'm joined via Google Hangout by Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Thanks for being there.
Good to be here, Jono.
And we've also got with us again via Google Hangout our resident wise old elder, the Silver Fox himself, Lindsay. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Now, for any new listeners, the ARP is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion roundtable which broadcasts live every Sunday from just after 3 p.m. Live listeners can take part in a live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcasts. So hello to all of the people who are there already. All episodes are archived at that channel and also available in MP3 format for you to download from our website free of charge at ausroundtable.com. That's AUSroundtable.com. Views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and all important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to at our site so you can verify and analyse it for yourself, which we always recommend you do. Episodes generally run for 2 hours, and I'll get to today's rundown right now. We'll start off by taking a look at some more medical breakthroughs, and then in the domestic segment, we've only got the 3 topics today. A report warns that more than half of students are chasing dying careers. We'll take a look at the Gold Coast Police Review, and also Operation Fortitude down there in Melbourne, which was apparently shut down by protesters. Then in the international segment, we'll look at New Zealand introducing new national security provisions, Facebook claiming to have reached 1 billion users, and our new segment, the Honourable Mentions. Before we get into all of those topics and more, boys, it's always nice to say hello. So, Lindsay, how are you today, my good man?
Yeah, I'm very good. Like I said before we went on air, we got Mez arrived back to pick up her van. What else is there? My mother's home from hospital. I don't know, that's about it. Yeah.
Oh, well, make sure you say hi to Mez for me. And Ethan, you couldn't make it up to the live studio today, so we're all broadcasting individually. It's always a bit of a different experience, but I'm glad you could join us for the show.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Jono. It's been another big week of news, very important news that I hope to get out.
All right, well, let's get straight into the introduction segment. We like to start off just by taking a look at some of the more nonsensical stuff in the news. And Lindsay, you've been keeping track for us of all of the medical breakthroughs in the news.
Yes, it's just intrigued me. I've been looking for some of these over the last, probably the last month, and they're just not there. So for some reason or other, the paper just decided to withhold any more medical breakthroughs, and then suddenly this week, I think it was 7 or 8, a phenomenal number anyway, just suddenly hit us all at once. So I'll just start with a couple, and then I'll throw it back and see whether you fellas have any comments on it. The first was on page 8 on the 27th of August. The headline said, "Lives at risk as girls skip cancer jabs." And I'll quote, "Almost 30% of girls aged 15 in 2013 were not fully immunised against cervical cancer. And in some areas only, half of all girls have had the vaccine." The Sunshine Coast medical receptionist, and this was referred to earlier, was only 24 when she developed aggressive cervical cancer last year, followed by liver cancer. Although she was vaccinated, Emma said she had not realised that Gardasil did not protect against all cancer-causing strains of HPV. Now, there are a couple of points I'd like to make there before I throw it to you, Ethan. But the first was that they're saying they're not fully immunised. Well, yeah, I think once again, they're confusing immunisation and vaccination. That's the first thing. Even if they were vaccinated, they probably wouldn't be immunised. That's the first thing. And second thing to keep in mind is that to this poor girl's, I don't know what you'd call it there, chagrin, or she's suddenly found out that even having all this stuff, Gardasil and what have you, made no difference. She still finished up with a strain of HPV that they haven't covered, and she's in a bad way with liver cancer. So I'll throw it to you, Ethan. I've got a few more I want to go through, but we'll just see if you've got a comment on that first.
Yeah, just quickly, Lindsay. In relation to this story and just all the stories in general, because I'm looking at your agenda right now, and there's quite a few there that have stacked up. It's almost as if they have a recurring amount, say 2 per week, of medical stories, and they've all just piled up because they didn't have any room, and they've all just spat them out at once. It's like a hole that's been jammed by the look of it. But going to this first story, this story about the cancer here, as she developed aggressive cervical cancer, it's ironic how the vaccine that's mentioned here is Gardasil, and that is the vaccine that our current Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, refused to have his daughters vaccinated when he was health minister in this country back in 2006, I believe that it was. He said that his daughters will not be taking Gardasil, and it's just ironic how this lady is developing all of these cancers, and we do know there's a connection between the two. And as you said, Lindsay, you know, the immunization and vaccination, they're different things. So, you know, it's a terrible story, but it is something that did stand out with me was that particular vaccine that has been dangerously proven to react badly in the body and destroy the immune system. And it's just one of many stories that you do have here, Lindsay.
Yeah, we spoke about this, I don't know how long ago now, quite a few weeks ago, about the number of girls in the US who were coming down with very, very bad reactions to Gardasil. And I think we made a comment about the fellow that designed it was, you know, everybody's heaping praise on him. And really, he should be hanging his head in shame with the number of people who have been, young girls whose life has been ruined virtually by it. But anyway, I don't know whether, John, have you got any comment on this so far, Jono, or will I just keep going?
No, mate, you're right to keep going.
Okay. The next one was on page 13, on the 27th of August. The headline read, Autism diagnosis rates on rise as cases found earlier. And basically it says more Australian children are being diagnosed with autism, but it is unclear whether the condition is more prevalent or just being detected earlier. A study of 10,000 children split into two cohorts found 25% more children were diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder before the ages of 7 compared to older children. And that's the end of the quote. And I'll relate about I received an email during the week, and I haven't had a chance to follow it up. They're claiming that a US Congressman, Bill Posey, speaking on the floor of the House, made certain statements about a whistleblower on the Centre for Disease Control, saying how they'd fudged the figures and thrown anything that appeared bad towards the MMR vaccine was thrown in a rubbish bin, etc. Now, I don't want to go into the whole detail of that until I can confirm it, but just the part that I've read out the quote there, it sort of, is it that autism is prevalent in that age group because that's where they get the vaccines, or is it autism is just naturally occurring? There's so many different variables there. Either have you got a take on this at all, having read that?
Yeah, Lindsay, and just to point out to listeners, we did throw this in just at the last minute. If we're a bit shaky reading these out, it's because we didn't really have much of a structure, but we just wanted to reiterate that these articles are within 1 day of each other, packed into the Courier Mail, which is our only newspaper here in Brisbane, and it's interesting how they can have these articles about vaccines, etc., and then they can also have they can also have stories rather relating to autism. And then again, we go back to language, we go back to what people can see and how they're trained to put words into the subconscious, how to separate them, etc. But that's more of a complex thing. With this story, in relation to fudging figures, you know, we do know that the only reason why they have said that some of these diseases have disappeared or some of these diseases are on the rise is because over time, from the periods that they are testing them from, they have changed the definition of what you need to be classified as said disease. So, for example, autism used to have a very strict code or a strict guideline that a child or a person had to meet to be classified under that, and over time they have loosened it. They have loosened it more, similar to what they do with ADHD and all of these things that are very broadly based and not very defined. So when they say that these things are on the rise, you can look at the actual statistics of them being on the rise, the fudge statistics, and it's the same with measles and chickenpox and all of these things. All they did was increase the definition of what it is. So, Lindsay, there's a lot of things that are going on here where we don't get the chance to have the conversation with these articles. We don't have the chance already from the suppressed mainstream media. But even if we did, we can't even put a clear, accurate representation on what the actual figures are, because people that may or may not have had said diseases over time have either been thrown out or classified wrongly because of these figures. Have you heard of this before, Lindsay?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it just frustrates me. It's almost like we've talked about this before. The meaning of words, definition of words. It's the same sort of thing. All you've got to do is change the definition. We had the same with fluoridation. They're talking about teeth, and they're talking about one part surface of one tooth, but that can suddenly be 13 or 15% increase in the number of dental caries the child gets, or something like that. So it's very easy to fudge the figures. We've found it with the fluoride. I can imagine they'd be doing it with this autism as well. Look, can I just whip through? I'll just go through the other few headlines. I won't expand on them very much at all, and so people will get an idea of just how quickly it's come up through this week. In the Courier Mail again, on page 19, on the 27th of August, the same thing again. It's all on the same day. Take heart from vaccine. Flu jab is better for your ticker than quitting fags. Now, I couldn't believe that when I read it, and I said, like, it's a miracle, isn't it? It's a miracle. The next one was page 5 on the 26th of August. Australian drug could kill cancers. It's the drug that could turn the battle against cancer on its head. And anyway, I won't go on and on about it, but it's the same thing. The next one was on page 11 on the 25th of August, and the headline read, Cancer Battle Given Heart. Basic heart medication is able to extend the lives of women suffering ovarian cancer, and may also be effective to combat other types of cancer, researchers believe. And it goes on and on. But when you get to the fine print, it extends the survival rate of ovarian cancer in patients from 42 months to 47.8 months. Now, again, it's a miracle. It's a miracle, The next one is on the 29th of August on page 27. New drug gives hope. And it says, a new drug promising to stop the major causes of chronic kidney failure in its tracks and save patients around the world needing transplants or on a life dialysis have been developed by Australian scientists. And it goes on about this. And my comment is, if I had a family member with chronic kidney disease, I would welcome this. But I fear it's just like all these other things we've just read today. It's just another publicity scam. And it's always, there's going to be a breakthrough in a few weeks or a few months, or I just, to me, it's a cruel joke. It's not. We're sort of trying to make fun of it or whatever, or highlight it, but it really is a cruel joke, and I get sick of them. Anyway, I'll throw it to you, Ethan, and see if you've got a final comment on that.
Yeah, it's interesting, Lindsay, looking at all of these articles. And again, I have to reiterate, this is from the 26th of August to the 29th of August. I do believe these articles have spanned. So within a matter of days, there are so many articles within the same publication speaking about new cures, things on the rise, but at the same time, gloom and doom. It's all of this confusing language that they do to distract the people. And one thing that I noticed recently, being in a doctor's surgery, was how accessible flu shots and vaccines have become from, say, when I was a child. You can just go in and you can buy them and do them yourself now. It's unbelievable to see all of these things. And for those who are new to the show and wondering why we are making fun of some of these articles that are out, there's two things. One, head to episode 30 we head to the Sunshine Coast and had Lisa Weckett on the show. We spent the first 90 minutes of the show talking about the dangers of vaccines, and previous weeks before that, misconceptions within the mainstream media, i.e. there's a difference between vaccination and immunization. Let's look at the corporate interests behind them. So the reason we're speaking about these vaccines is because of previous episodes that we've gone through this. And the second one is we've also gone through multiple medical cures that have been in the Courier Mail. And John, I'll throw it over to you because I know you're very familiar with the book and the film 1984. This is exactly what they do in the book, making people believe that there's going to be hope on the horizon, but then it's just the same thing over and over with really no end in sight, John.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I don't really have too much more to add to all of that. Let's move on to the domestic segment. And the first topic is to do with a report which apparently warns that more than half of students are chasing dying careers, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, John. And this is from an article from the ABC on Wednesday entitled "More than half of students chasing dying careers, report warns." And I'll read this out, and there's a number of things in this article. It's a good article that have been addressed that do relate to our current situation. Quote, 60% of Australian students are training for jobs that will not exist in the future or will be transformed by automation, according to a new report by the Foundation for Young Australians. The non-for-profit group, which works with young Australians to create social change, says the national curriculum is stuck in the past and digital literacy in particular needs to be boosted. Foundation Chief Executive Jan Owen says young people are not prepared for a working life that could include 5 career changes and an average of 17 different jobs. She says today's students will be affected by 3 economic drivers: automation, globalization, and collaboration. Quote, many jobs and careers are disappearing because of automation, Ms. Owen said. The second driver is globalization, a lot of different jobs that we're importing and exporting. And then thirdly, collaboration, which is all about this new sharing economy. Gillian Kenny is now the co-founder of a program that inspires young women to take up engineering. And she says there is an alarming amount of university and TAFE students who she believes are studying in the wrong areas. Quote, nearly 60% of students at university and nearly 70% at TAFE were studying jobs that will be automated, Ms. Kenny said. So that's 44% of jobs that will be automated in the next 10 years. The foundation's Mrs. Owen said students should be gearing themselves towards jobs that will open into the future, including in the healthcare and age sectors. She said job opportunities in the digital economy and the green economy would also continue to evolve. End quote. Now, there's a few issues to touch on here in this article. One is, of course, the obvious, and that is the dangers of a 21st century Australian era and what that means to general jobs and automated robots replacing hardworking Australians, automated technology. And Lindsay, you've had something similar in your agenda for a while now. I think you scrapped it, and I wanted to speak on that for a long time because when you study those who dictate our lives, they have said in their personal memoirs on many occasions that their goal is to have robots or technology replace humanity in the workplace. And with self-service at supermarkets, the push for a cashless society, even the census, John, which we spoke about before, we are seeing that plan is being incrementally rolled out. Now, the second point is the highlight of how Australian schools are failing this generation, and that is, for me personally, and I was in school a lot more recently than you two gentlemen, I've noticed how outdated, controlled, and designed the system is. So if you were training new students for jobs whilst also eliminating possibilities of the roles that they could get, you can see how this conundrum works, and they've set it up. And finally, I love how this article and report is touching on at least the key underlying mechanisms behind the problems, and those are automation, globalization, and collaboration. So just think about those things because they are really, without speaking too much of the agenda behind them, those are the things that are driving this world to make this change. Now, Lindsay, I'll throw it over to you first because you've lived in Australia where things weren't like this. Right now, these days, students are being trained in a controlled environment for career paths that are systematically being eroded by the elimination of national sovereignty, digital technology, etc., etc. So it's good to see that this report is addressing these issues, but people are so programmed to not analyze the information, and it seems that the problem is only going to get worse with each passing day, Lindsay. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on everything I've just said.
Okay, my first take on it is even when I was a youngster, there were huge numbers of people who did university courses which were arts courses and virtually nondescript courses, so that you didn't come out qualified to do anything in particular. You had a history degree or something like that, and most people then went hunting to do jobs. Now, I think you'll find that just by listening to people on television now, there are lots and lots of them trying to get into visual arts or that sort of thing now. Now, whether they got the jobs for that, I don't know. Now, the second thing is, this was a fair while ago, probably back in the 90s. There was a major move to transport our industries to third world countries, and I remember reading the parliamentary transcript of the speeches that were given, and the politicians, in speaking to this bill, came out and admitted that yes, it's going to cause a major bout of unemployment in Australia, but that's just something that those people are going to have to wear. And that really upset me, particularly when the Labor Party were coming out on this. And it just reminded me of what we spoke about last week with Bill Shorten, talking about the free trade thing. Oh, yeah, well, that's just what we say for the workers, but we really need free trade. And it's the same sort of thing. They've been doing this for a long time. What they say to their members, what they say to the public is not what they say and what they do. You've just got to watch what they do. They're trying to export the jobs, and I don't know whether somebody's putting a bullet to the head or like a gun to the head or what's going on, but you've got a number of those things happening. I'll throw it to John and see if he's got any comment on this, and then we maybe can discuss, because there's other things to do with overseas students coming into our university as well, and then once they get the qualifications, they're all around hunting for jobs in our country, which is throwing competition for ordinary Australians. So I'll see what John's got to say on that.
Well, from what I can tell, the report that Ethan's referring to was saying that half of students are chasing a dying career. I'd like to know which half are chasing careers that are worth pursuing in the first place. I mean, if we're talking about higher education in Australia and probably all of the Western world, to me, it's all a waste of time. It's all utterly corrupt. Everybody who walks into university, no matter what field of study they're pursuing, is going to be taught nonsense, whether that's in the arts or the social science, or in economics or commerce, or in medicine, even in science. Perhaps engineering, they might be learning something useful there, but for the most part, it seems to me that all of higher education is a waste of time and a scam. So can you tell us, Ethan, did they distinguish in this report which careers they thought people were pursuing that were worthwhile?
Yeah, I read it out in the article. They spoke about, and this is where I was going to continue on with my personal experience. Personally, in my own life, I've been involved in a lot of RTO work through aged care and through counselling and all of these things to help the community. And one thing that I learnt while I was there, and a lot of the people that were above me always spoke about in meetings, were the fact that there's more people that need help these days, whether it be based on economic, especially in rural regions where there's drug problems, there's economic problems, there's health problems, all of these, there's new cases of autism going through the roof, all these things. There's more people that need help these days, but the government are squashing RTO, registered trade organisations, so much that they're not able to pay people, and then people can't do it. So it's a conundrum, and this is what I was speaking of. What they were saying in the report was that careers like engineering and all of these things, they're aspiring for jobs that in the next 10 years are going to turn automated. They're going to have robots, they're going to have digital platforms that are going to be doing the work rather than them. So people are in university right now in some of these science fields and some of these economics, through some of these medicine fields, that are not going to have jobs, prosperous jobs in the future. And they spoke about having multiple jobs, and there's going to be 5 different career changes, because, as Lindsay said, his time was different. We live in a world today where already, if you go to university, you'll spend upward, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for a piece of paper that won't even guarantee you a job because of all these things. And Lindsay, you touched on globalization and university students coming in. This report does also touch on that. It's not the fact that everything is becoming automated. That's just one part. And the second part is the fact that we're exporting most of our jobs, and that people that are coming into this country are also taking the jobs. So the main premise of this article, Lindsay, is to address really the underlying mechanisms as to why young Australians are unemployed and why young Australians are not going to benefit in the future because of all of these things. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. And one of the things that I discussed a long time ago, they were pushing tertiary, like service industry jobs, rather than producing something that you can sell to somebody or whatever. And if you take that to its logical conclusion, if I go over and do your washing and you do my washing, that's double the GDP of Australia. If we all do each other's washing, that's double the G. But we haven't actually created anything. We've still only got the same amount of washing that's been done. Does that make sense? And that's where I think we're going wrong. I think these people are making a big deal about, how many people, all these young kids are working in McDonald's or whatever. But that's only because they're cooking somebody else's meal who could be cooking it at home in their own kitchen. And it's a real worry to me that we're heading down this road. Anyway, I'll just see what Jono's got to say about what you and I have just said as well.
So you guys are discussing the fact that foreign student. I mean, what's the main thrust of the argument here?
Okay. We'll just move on. Okay. The main premise was that there's multiple aspects as to why employment and the future for young Australians is crumbling, and it's because of automation through some of these university courses in medicine, science and engineering. The second is globalization, exporting jobs, university students being prioritized for all of these things, and the third is the way that the economy is going, etc., etc. It's a big, complex topic, but as a final thought, you can read the report at AusRoundtable.com. We'll have the link up there, and you'll be able to look at what they're saying, because it's a fantastic report and it really is addressing some of these things that, you'd be called a racist for, you'd be categorized under a certain particular train of perception if you spoke about these things. But this report is focusing on the facts, and the facts is that this country for young Australians is not looking brighter in the future, and it's not because of the reasons that our government is saying, such as the economy and all of these things. So it's a fantastic report, and you can check it out at AusRoundtable.com when we have the website up. And that's about it. John, I'll throw it to you.
All right, well, the second topic for domestic is to do with a Gold Coast police review, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. And this is going to be it's going to be multitudes of police stories that are going to be put together, because there's been some very big developments this week on the front of police and national security and all of these things that are supposed to uphold our security, but they're doing the opposite. The first one is about a Gold Coast police review that has uncovered interesting activities, and this article was posted yesterday on news.com.au, and it's entitled Coast Police Having Sex on Desks Review Fines. Quote, sex on desks and in the back of police cars, female officers grabbed on the boobs, and taunts directed at gay officers are some of the outrageous behaviour among Gold Coast Police, an internal review has been told. Officers are queuing up in surprising numbers to complain to the inquiry, with 1/5 of police in the Gold Coast district surveyed saying they do not believe their managers show the type of behaviour expected of all employees. Assistant Commissioner Brent Ponting called for the review, which is to focus on cultural behaviour issues, bullying and homophobic behaviour. So far, more than 100 Coast officers have put their hands up to give statements to the independent Brisbane employee relations company contracted by the Queensland Police Service to conduct the review. Spots for the daily taped interviews at the Surfers Paradise station are filling up, surprising the consultants and ensuring the review will extend until at least October. The confidential survey, a copy of which was obtained by the Gold Coast Bulletin, shows 1 in 5 police are not happy about their superiors' behaviour. Sources close to key witnesses at the inquiry revealed that consultants will be told that A desktop sex culture exists in at least 2 stations and within 1 agency where police have had sex in their offices with their contacts, raising questions about favours being traded and corruption. The second is some senior officers are constantly putting pressure on young constables, with a female officer, quote, grabbed on the boobs in a most recent incident. The third one is 2 officers were caught on CCTV having consenting sex in public, but escaped with a slap on the wrist. The fourth is graffiti in a stairwell that these police are doing. They're graffitiing all over the place. The fifth one is a senior officer and a junior officer were disciplined after having sex in a car while on duty, and the list goes on and on and on. It's quite a big list of what's happening in the Gold Coast police culture right now. I'll continue on with the article. Some cultural incidents have spilt over into tribunals, with the Anti-Discrimination Commission considering a complaint by a constable after the word gay was placed beside his name on a duty roster. Lawyers assisting some of the complaints suggested most of the issues surround the Coolangatta, Palm Beach, Broad Beach, and Southport stations. Quote, it shows an appalling management practice. There's a group inside and a group outside culture, police source said. Legitimate complaints get lost in the system. If you are not loyal to the hierarchy, you might as well be dead. You won't get career development and opportunities. If you don't follow the guidelines of the in-group, you are stuffed, one police officer said. At least 43% of officers surveyed rejected the assertion that recruitment and promotion decisions in the organisation are fair, end quote. Now, many on this show know that personally I'm not the biggest fan of police as a collective, as the mafia that I do believe they are, but I promise I didn't just throw this in here because of my bias. I mean, look at this. Regardless of what you think of the behaviour in general, these are men and women who are supposed to be patrolling and upholding the perception of laws that we have. And now we're seeing this rubbish. We're seeing graffitiing, sex in cars, sex in public, assault in the workplace, all of these things that are happening. And there's 43% of people that are working saying that this is not acceptable. So, Lindsay, this is the same area, and I'll throw it over to you because I know you've got a bit to expand on, but this is the same area where police have been assaulting people, and as the article mentions, this is a culture. And despite what the police commissioner said, because he came out this week and said that it was just a few bad apples, which is not the truth at all, this sort of behavior is part of a corporate structure, a structure that can take individual police with good intentions and force them to conform to the in-group, as this article says. And I know, first of all, I want to get your thoughts on this particular findings and then expand on some of the other articles that you've found that back up this statement that this isn't just an individual thing, it's a group culture, Lindsay.
Yeah, I saw this article that you've just done. I saw that in the paper, and I thought I'll leave that one because I was concentrating more on people who've having their wrist broken and, you know, that sort of being bashed up and things like that. So that's what I'd concentrated on. But I saw what you said, and I think it's exactly what you were just saying. I think that this man, Ian Stewart, the commissioner, has come out and defended people bashing, quite viciously bashing prisoners who were handcuffed. And as a result of that, he's virtually given the go-ahead, the green light to the thugs in the police force. Now, you've just stated that there's quite a percentage of the police force who are upset about this because they'd be being tarred with the same brush and they just don't like it. But to me, I don't see how his position is sustainable. They've only just renewed his contract. I think he should go, because if I'd had my wrist broken and only because the people before me hadn't been disciplined, like if you've got police officers harming people before me and they got off it scot-free without any discipline whatsoever, well, of course, somebody's going to do it to me thinking they're going to get away with it. Now, how many other people, one of the articles I read said there were people coming out of the woodwork everywhere making complaints. And lawyers, you know, anything up to 50 people on their books who are making complaints about what's going on in the Gold Coast police area. Now, to me, this commissioner has got to go. I don't see how he can possibly keep his job. But anyway, I'll be very quick, and I'll just give you the headlines. I won't go on too much about it. But you've got on page 9 on the 29th of August, the headline said, "Cop this. Police bashing victim did ask for charges to be laid despite claims he never came forward." Well, that was rebutting Ian Stewart, who'd said, "Oh yeah, we didn't prosecute the police because this man Betchick or whatever I think his name is, didn't make a complaint. Well, he's come out and he said, yes, I did make a complaint. So that was a lie by Stewart. The next one was page 5 on the 28th of August, strong arm of the law. And basically that's saying that there's been an explosion of allegations of police brutality on the Gold Coast, with shocking footage emerging of this most recent attack, which was a man called Michael Cox, 29. And he was physically being restrained, and he had handcuffs on, and the policeman was sitting beside him on the bench, and for no good reason. You couldn't see this bloke Cox do anything or say anything, and suddenly the policeman threw him to the floor and smashed his head into the tiles. So anyway, the final one I've got here is on page 21 on the 27th of August, the headline said, bashing decision, a total cop-out. And they've got an ex-police officer who was, his name's Terry Goldsworthy, and he's an ex-ethical standards command investigator and a detective inspector, and he's now working at I think it's the Gold Coast University, and here we are at the Bond University criminologist, and he's saying, look, this is just not good enough. This whole scene is just not up to scratch. So I'll leave it at that. To me, I think that we should all be calling for this commissioner to go. There really does need to be a change of culture, and it has to come from the top. I can't see any other way around it. So I'll give it back to you, Ethan, and just see if you've got a comment on my comments, and then we'll see what Jono has to say.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And that's the sort of direction that I wanted to sort of take. The way that we structured this is because I read your agenda last night and I saw these stories about the police brutality and decided to say, well, no, it's not just these isolated events. This is a more in-depth core problem within the Gold Coast Police Force. And I encountered the Gold Coast Police Force I'm more towards the Gold Coast where I live, and encounter a lot of the Broadbeach and Southport officers that are down here, and the culture that's down here. We have stupid shows on TV called Gold Coast Cops where they're running around as superheroes and all of this nonsense trying to protect the public. But as you can see, and this isn't just an isolated event. A few years ago, there was Gold Coast police that were involved in the drug trafficking down here, that were involved with the nightclubs that were happening. There was all of this collaborative efforts through the police, and the corruption down here was just so prevalent. And now it's continuing to resurface. And what you've just read out, Lindsay, in relation to police brutality, what I've read out in terms of just the behaviour and the culture that they have inside of these offices with behaviour like this, with sex in public, graffiti, all of these things that these reviews are finding. And I go back again, I just want to reiterate, this is much more than just isolated incidents, as the police commissioner would have you say. Lindsay's absolutely right. The police commissioner, he just had his contract renewed, he has a terrible track record, and he's trying to tell us these are just a few rotten apples in the bunch. And John, I know you spoke to one of the founders of Cop Block quite some time ago, and I take the same approach as him. Is sure, you can respect the individual police officer for their effort and their work that they do put in, but especially with this Gold Coast Police Force, you can see that this is much more than just individual behaviour. This is more of a collective. What say you?
Yeah, well, I mean, the report that you're speaking about, who was responsible for compiling or writing that report?
Yeah, no, it was in the article. I can't go back to the article now. I've got rid of it. But yeah, if for the listeners out there, if you did listen, I did read out which group did it, and you can find it at AusRoundtable.com. But it's an independent group that has been hired by one of the chiefs down at Southport who is fed up with this behaviour and wants them to anonymously investigate what's happening and interview the police officers. So it's an independent group that's been hired by the police, to answer your question, John.
Yeah, because I mean, you can see the conflict of interest. Ultimately, any report that's either paid for by the police or by the government, or is written by them, or is influenced by them in any way, you have to question how much of it we can trust. And like, we do see these articles in the newspaper saying that the police have been found guilty of doing this, or police accused of doing that, what have you. I wonder how much of this information, how do I put this? There's an idea out there that maybe they're conditioning the masses to accept a totalitarian state or to accept police brutality. So by putting these kinds of articles out there, by putting these kinds of reports out there, because it's not enough to get people to march in the streets, then over time they can condition people to accept this as being normal. And I'm not really, I mean, how do I put this? That particular report that you mentioned, I haven't heard of it before. But again, if it was in any way at the behest of the police, I wonder why that information is making it out to us in the first place. If that, like, I'll throw to Lindsay there. Lindsay, can you see where I'm going with this? Why is this information making it out to the public in the first place? If we accept that newspapers and the news are just the propaganda arm of the government, if we accept that, then we have to question, why would the propaganda arm be telling us that the police have these problems? Do you get where I'm going with this?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. During the week, there was, I can't think of his name, it won't come to me now, but one of the Courier Mail journalists was doing like a column that he has, and he was dumping on the police as well, and that was my first reaction. But I think it's probably a little bit more complicated than just they control everything. I think just in their long-term interest, there's got to be some truth spoken in their newspapers. Otherwise, everybody will just ignore them all the time, right? So the lie is based on some fact or some truth, and I think you'll find that that's at the basis of it all. So I don't have a huge problem with the fact that we're finding out about some of this. I think some of it's got to come out because people are not stupid. You fellas were picked up in the park. The same thing. You know, a few times I've had experience. Like I used to be, when I worked in New Guinea, I was a police officer. I came down here and I saw them doing horrible things to people. You know, standing on a young boy's foot and squashing it into the ground with his heel, or just threatening people and things like this. And I thought, in Papua New Guinea, if you did that, you'd never get any cooperation from the public. And these people don't seem to care down here. Well, we're all coming across this on a daily basis. If there was no publicity about it at all, then people it'd prick their conscience. They think, no, there's something's wrong with the police here. Whereas at least when they bring out reports of an investigation or whatever, at least the public can say, oh, right, well, something's being done. Even if it never does get done, the public will be saying to themselves, well, there's things in train. They're trying to fix it. I think that's how I view it.
Because we've spoken on this show before about how many police shows there are, like in Australia and in the United States. There are so many shows, whether it's Blue Heelers here in Australia or Water Rats was very popular when I was younger. Then in the United States, they've got Law and Order and these kinds of shows. And this is all just blatant propaganda to get people to believe the police are there to help them and that they need the police because there are all these baddies out there that the police are catching. People are propagandized from such a young age in this country and others to believe the police are generally good, even if there are a few bad apples, and that we need the police and that we should be thankful that we have the police force, even though they can be flawed at times. And when I hear about reports like this, it just seems like it's building upon that same foundation of, oh, look, there's a few bad police and they've been caught, what have you, and there are police who also agree that some of the other police are bad, but it's still taking for granted this aspect that you need the police in the first place. And any smart person has to ask themselves, well, hold on, how much do we actually need the police? So if the newspapers are still publishing these reports, and the reports are saying there's a few bad police and yada, 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 then to me this is just still more propaganda. It seems like they're exposing the problems. It seems like it, but really if you take a step back, no, they're still pretending as though the police force isn't just at a fundamental level a corrupt institution prima facie. Can you get where I'm going with this, Ethan?
Yeah, I can, and I can agree with the logic to a certain extent. What we're talking about with this article, though, is we're refuting the fact that the police commissioner said it was just a few bad apples. This report says that it's very widespread. It's in the majority of people, and the majority of workplaces in these police things are fed up with it. And for someone who's personally experienced it and lives near these particular police forces that are under investigation, I can attest to what this report is saying about that it's a common core corruption that is happening, or a bad behaviour that is happening within these police forces. It's not just a few bad apples, as the police commissioner is saying. And the interesting thing about this, Lindsay, is that this is the first time from my recollection that this has been handled externally, or reportedly handled externally, and it reportedly has been done anonymously, where the police are able to do it anonymously and line up to do all of this stuff. So, Lindsay, there could be a benefit there, as they're sort of, to my knowledge, they're sort of diversifying the way that they investigate this instead of it just being an internal thing that goes back to the same common core corrupt service that they have, where they handle it internally and nothing ever gets done, as we've seen in the past with multiple reviews, especially within the Queensland Police Force. And for the police commissioner to come out and say that this is something that shouldn't be worried about, all of this graffiti and sex culture and abuse and violence and the violent nature of the cops, for him to come out and say that this isn't something to be worried about, Lindsay, this is something that should concern everyone just listening to his words.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't want to sound like we're being, what's the word for it, too goody-goody or something, but you do expect a certain standard from the police. I expect a certain standard of behaviour from people who carry guns when I'm not allowed to carry a gun. I think that's my biggest problem. And I had another article in here. I won't read the whole article out, but it was about a young boy who had some people break into his house, threaten to rape his sister. They called the police. He ran outside with a curtain rod that he was protecting himself with, and the police shot him. And then he took them to court over it, and originally he was granted compensation, and then he went to they took it to appeal, and now he's up for thousands of dollars in court fees, and these compensations have been taken off him. Now my take on that is, whatever happens, don't ask the police into your home under any circumstances, because you're liable to finish up getting shot. That's the worry to me, and I think that's what I'm trying to get across. When you've got an ill-disciplined force with guns, anything can happen, and that's what worries me. If I've got people with guns, even if me and my children had guns, you have to be disciplined, and it worries me that these people are just like a pack of cowboys with guns, and we're unarmed. That's my biggest concern about it. Anyway, I'll give it back to you, Ethan. That's about all I've got to say on it now.
Yeah, Lindsay, I think we can expand and move on to the next topic here for domestic, and it has to do with Operation Fortitude that has happened. And again, this will be another approach to the police, but it's in a more federal sort of militarized way. And it was from an incident that did happen this week, where I'll just read out what I've got here. It's for those who are completely unaware of what happened in Melbourne this weekend. Let me read out an article from The Guardian on Friday entitled "Border Force Join Police in Huge Visa Fraud Crackdown in Melbourne CBD." And this happened on Friday and Saturday. It made big news, and I think that this was one of the most important things of the week to speak about. So I'll just read out this article, quote, for those who don't have any background, quote, "The centre of Melbourne will be swamped with police on Friday and Saturday night in a huge multi-agency operation to target everything from visa fraud to anti-social behaviour. Australian Border Force, police and transport officers will take up positions at various locations around the CBD and will be, quote, speaking with any individuals we cross paths with," end quote, said ABF Regional Commander Don Smith. Quote, "You need to be aware of the conditions of your visa. If you commit visa fraud, you should know it's only a matter of time before you get caught out," he said in a statement. Human rights advocates said the operation, codenamed Operation Fortitude, raised fears of police using racial profiling to justify stopping people, and that it risked militarization of the immigration system. Under the Migration Act, an authorized officer can ask for information from someone the officer, quote, knows or reasonably suspects is a non-citizen, end quote. The information can include evidence of being a lawful non-citizen and personal identity papers. The person must comply with the request within a time period, quote, specified by the officer, end quote. If the officer knows or reasonably suspects the person is an unlawful non-citizen, the officer must detain that person. But the human rights barrister, Julian Burnside, said he was not aware of anything in the Border Force Act which allowed officers to ask people to produce their visa papers on the spot. A spokesperson from the department confirmed there was no requirement for those with a visa to carry papers on them, but the department could check those details on the spot electronically, end quote. So for the context of what happened, for those who are unaware, and then I'll move on to what happened afterwards, a special Australian Border Force was set to patrol Melbourne and ask people to identify themselves as a citizen on the spot. I mean, you could put this in any story of any tyrant in history, and that would fit perfectly without a doubt. I mean, Lindsay, you even rang me to ask if I had seen this. This is how outlandish this announcement was. Now, this was announced at approximately 9 a.m. in the morning on Friday, I believe, and by around 9:30 a.m. there was a snap protest in the centre of Melbourne, only a small group, but they managed to succeed with their objections to the operation. So let me just read out the start of an updated article on ABC following the commotion. Quote, "A major policing operation planned for Melbourne CBD over the weekend has been cancelled after a backlash over plans to include Australian Border Force officials in the crackdown. Victoria Police issued a press release on Friday afternoon saying Operation Border Force had been cancelled. Quote, "We understand there has been a high level of community interest and concern which has been taken into consideration when making the decision. Victoria's priority is the safety and well-being of the whole community, and we will continue to work with our partner agencies to achieve this," end quote. So I'll throw it over to you there, Lindsay, first, and we could build upon some of the broader thoughts behind this. But you originally rang me up to see if I had seen this story, and I had, and I thought that this was one of the most important issues of the week just because it came out of nowhere. An Australian Border Force just patrolling the streets, demanding you show them papers on the street. I mean, it's unbelievable stuff when you really think about it, Lindsay.
Yeah, I agree. And at the time, I was more enthused about the fact that these demonstrators had actually withheld. It's almost like putting your finger in the dam or whatever, the finger in the dike, holding back the tide. That they'd stopped it almost immediately, and that was the good thing I liked about it. Now, some of the things they were saying on their placards or what have you, I didn't agree with, but the fact that they put a stop to this sort of tyrant behaviour was a great joy to me. Now, there's since been politicians coming out and saying, "Oh, it was just poorly worded publicity stunt or whatever by the police or the border police," and I thought, no, this should not have happened. Somebody somewhere that high up should have known that this is unacceptable behaviour in Australia. And I think the problem is, as you've highlighted so many times, they've been getting away with this rubbish, anti-terrorism laws, we'll invade your home and we won't have to tell you about it for a year and all this sort of stuff. They've been gradually getting away with more and more and more violations of our inherited rights, and now they think they can do any damn thing. And I'm just so pleased that somebody's put a stop to them. I think I referred the other day when I was talking about it, it's almost like somebody smacked the dog on the nose and said, "Stop your behaviour." Now, how long that's going to last for, I don't know. But anyway, it caused a lot of happiness for me the other day. I thought, good, finally somebody's put a stop to a bit of this nonsense. Now, whether we're going to stop it entirely with this or not, I don't know. But it had to come. I mean, it can't go on like this. If it keeps going on, you'll find it'll reach a stage where suddenly all those people who've got their guns buried and things like that are going to consider taking them out of the ground, because it'll have gone too far. Now, I think this might have saved a lot of lives having these demonstrations in Melbourne, and hopefully it'll shaken the politicians a little bit so they get a bit of common sense back into their heads. Anyway, I'll see what Jono's got to say about it, whether he's interested in that or not.
Well, I haven't been following the news as closely for the past week or so I didn't really follow this one. Are you guys telling me the official story here is that the Australian government was planning to ask people for their visa papers on the ground, and then a sudden protest sprung up and then changed the government's plans? Is that the official story here?
That's the official story, yeah.
And you guys think that sounds like you believe that's what actually happened, that a protest stopped the government's plans to do this?
Well, I don't know. It appeared that way, yeah. It appeared that way.
So what, like a spontaneous protest just developed out of nowhere and changed the government's plans to ask people for their immigration papers?
Yeah, what my understanding of it, Jono, is that there's this group, and I've not heard of them before, but from their placards, they look like rent a crowd. Your usual left-wing rent a crowd. We're out in the streets and holding up the traffic in the centre of Melbourne. That's my understanding of it. Well, and I thought, well, that's quite feasible to me.
Well, what I was going to expand on, Lindsay, was it was the first time that social justice warriors, as we said off air, came in handy because it was that rabid socialist sort of left-wing protest that really just shut down the city, and they refused to move away until they cancelled what was happening. And normally you don't see groups like this become an advantage to real issues that were happening. And, they were saying that this was racial vilification. But we obviously think that there's a much sinister thing behind what is really happening with the militarization of police and whatnot. So it was the first time that these social justice warriors came into to play, and as I said, they took into the consideration all the outrage. The social media was packed. Politicians were comparing Tony Abbott to Joseph Stalin, and it really just caused this massive shitstorm, if I can use that word. It caused a shitstorm online and in the streets, and that's why they had to cancel it, because it came out of nowhere. Now, John, you, following on from the previous segment, you were speaking about how we're trained from young to trust the police and trust the police. With operations like this, how long is it going to take until people realise that the police are not their friends, and things like this are potentially dangerous to our freedom?
Well, I'm still just trying to get my head around this. So the official story is that the government was actually planning to ask people for their papers on the streets, but they changed their plans because of a protest in Melbourne. That's the official story here.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's it.
And you guys, so you guys actually think the government was planning to do this, and they actually changed their mind because of a protest?
Yeah, I think so. I think, like I'm saying to you, they closed down the centre of Melbourne. A normal group wouldn't get it together in that time. Maybe the socialist, this group, did manage to get the numbers out to stop the traffic. Now, I don't know why they didn't bring in the fellas with the machine guns or what have you, but apparently that might have been too distasteful for the Australian public. So somewhere along the line, some politician said, "Oh, well, we'll pull this out until we can sort of how we're going to do it."
Well, what happened was Abbott was getting massive political backlash from this decision, and that was what was really ultimately, I believe, the underlying mechanism as to why it didn't go ahead, was because there was no positives coming for, we know that it's a paradigm, left, right wing, false paradigm, but for the general public, their agenda wasn't being served with all of the backlash that was coming on Abbott from this. They thought it'd be a very small, covert thing that they could get away with, but all of a sudden it got widespread attention. And I've got a couple of friends staying in Melbourne right now who were there, just taking photos of it all happening as it happened, and it really caused a commotion, So I'm glad that the plans didn't go ahead, but there's a much sinister agenda here which we can get into in a moment. But I'll throw back to John to see if he's got anything else to say.
All right, so just bear with my skepticism here. Who supposedly organised these protests that changed government policy?
It was I don't think there was a particular group.
So, can you guys understand why, to me, this whole story just sounds ridiculous and fabricated?
Oh yeah, I can see the point you're making. Yeah, I'm sure Ethan can too.
I understand the logic, but the event, I'm trying to understand if John is saying that there was physically no people there, or whether the protesters were controlled opposition. That's because there were people there. My friends were there taking photos of them as it was happening, so I believe the event was real, but I'm trying to understand whether John thinks that it was controlled opposition and that this was just a show that was staged. Is that what you're saying, John?
Well, we know for a fact with Iraq in 2003 that there were, the protests in Australia, across Australia, to do with the Iraq War. We know that there were at least tens of thousands. People tried to say there was 1 million. I don't believe that, but there were definitely tens of thousands of people marching all across Australia, and that didn't change our official story version of we want to go into Iraq, right? And it seems to me very implausible that a spontaneous protest could, out of nowhere, manifest itself and change government policy on something like this. It just seems to me absurd to believe that. And this is the first, like I said, I haven't been following the news, so I didn't know that this was a story that was getting around. But let's think through this one. If the people had enough power and enough organisation to shut down a city on a topic like, asking potential immigrants for their visa papers, then why isn't that exact same people power being used to stop all of the other laws that have been passed following, the past 12 months worth of psyops in Australia. I mean, since when do we? Like, I just can't believe this is even. I'm dumbfounded by this story. It seems ridiculous to me, to be honest. I can't believe it. I cannot believe it.
Fair enough. Now, Lindsay,
who organised it? Who organised a spontaneous protest that was powerful enough to change government policy? Who did that?
we'll go look it up. You'll see the process that it took. It went viral as a natural process, and it happened.
I mean, like the taxi drivers down in Melbourne a few years ago stopped the city. They all went and did a mass sit down in front of Flinders Street Station, and it was made very clear to them where they'd be headed if they didn't stop what they were doing. So what, were these protesters just given free rein to shut down? I mean, Melbourne's our second largest city, for Christ's sakes. It's millions of people live there. And what, and protesters just went and stopped the whole city?
No, they stopped the centre of the city, I think. Like probably a couple of squares or something like that. I'm only guessing that, right? But
yeah,
that's how I understand it.
The same as they do here in Brisbane when the socialists do their snap protests and sit right near Central Station. It was the same thing that happened down in Melbourne with the socialists that were down there that shut down this part of the city, John.
Wow. Yeah, okay.
No, I can see your point of view, John. But to me, the Iraq War is a different kettle of fish, and I think you'll find that the public impression of this was they're not going to go around to foreigners asking for their visas. They're going to go around to everybody asking for your papers to show that you're not a foreigner with a visa. I think that was the point that was coming across. Now, I don't blame you for being skeptical about it, because, like you're saying, heaps of other people have tried this and have had no success. But I think this might have triggered off something a little bit more sinister, because suddenly this actually comes home to every one of us. Now, We've talked about going into people's houses and not having, searching their houses and not having to tell them for a year or whatever. But the vast majority of Australians will take the attitude, oh, that's only people who have been investigated for terrorism. It's not for people like me. Whereas this was for people like every one of us. We could be walking down the street of any city and we're going to have these officious individuals coming up to us demanding our papers. Now, we've had a long history of Hollywood movies showing these horrible Nazis doing that, right? So it's well embedded into the brains of ordinary people everywhere that this is a terrible thing and we can't abide by this. So to me, I don't have any problem with it. I think it probably did pan out the way we've just said it's panned out. But I can understand your skepticism.
Well,
anyway,
in the live chat, justiceforgermans.com, one of our regular listeners, is saying that it all unfolded very quickly on Twitter. A snap protest called for by an activist, I'd love to know who that activist is, retweeted by several left-wing and Greens members, and 2 hours later, bang, the city was shut down and press cancelled. Okay, well, I'm just... Again, justiceforgermans.com is a loyal listener. I'm sure he believes everything that he just posted there. So let's go with that. Greens members. So if this was being retweeted and encouraged by Greens members, and you know what we've discussed on this show about how the Greens are completely controlled, in my opinion, it's a CIA front. It's quite obvious that it is. Then we're supposed to believe that a spontaneous protest to change government policy was helped along by
we just said that it was by socialists and Greens members. That's why it was such. It happened so quickly, because some of these social justice warriors that they campaign for their cultural Marxist beliefs, etc., etc. For the first time, they actually did something positive with their snap protests and whatnot. And their guise was that this is racism. You're being racist. Their typical thing. But it worked for us because we're seeing it as a militarization, as a Stalinist type of narrative where there's going to be police asking for your papers on the spot. So I'm happy that it did happen. My friends got some great photos of the protesters shutting down the city, and I'm glad that it didn't go ahead, because the way that I see it, expanding on the points, was I've studied this citizenship law that is supposed to come into play very shortly. It just got revoked again because of the human rights that it violates. But what they want to do is strip citizenships. And I watched the Senate, and what happened in the Senate inquiries was you discovered that in the legislation in its current form, they can strip an executive order to strip your citizenship. You will not be informed of it. You won't get a reasoning from it. And the way that I see it is, if we do unfortunately descend into a more controlled, militarized country, the two can coexist if they could get through. So, for example, you could be walking and asked to produce papers of your citizenship, and then you don't know that your citizenship's been cancelled, and then bam, you get arrested. And that's a fantastic way for them to crush dissent as they approach into a new world that they want to do. So looking forward, that's the type of logic that I had, John, expanding above the original story. Can you see the sort of connections that I'm making with these things?
Oh, I would love to believe that people could spontaneously organize a protest and shut down the city and change government policy. Like, I can see why you believe that this is a good thing, and that the social justice warriors, whether they realize or not, we're fighting for a good cause. Like, I can see if you buy into the story, like where you can take the story. I get that. I'm just questioning, since when, like the socialist alternative, they're completely controlled as well. So I'm sitting here and I'm like, what am I supposed to believe, that an anti-establishment protest was organized by people who were controlled by the establishment? It just seems absurd to me.
Need to get out to more protests, John. It happens quite regularly here in Brisbane. The Socialist Alliance do a lot of snap protests like that. For the wrong causes, obviously.
and they shut down the city and get government policy changed.
Yeah, they have on a few occasions, I recall.
Wow.
But, going to again, Lindsay, I'll throw it over to you. You see this bigger sort of picture that I'm trying to put the connections here, because their original intention was to have this border force go out with not much mainstream press behind it, and then it suddenly did get the attention, and obviously we saw the MPs, I saw them all over Facebook, MPs calling Abbott Stalin, telling people, get down to Melbourne now, you need to stop this before it begins, and people were really just in a shitstorm, as I said, if I could use that word. But do you see that if they did get this through, the precedent that it could set, Lindsay, when the pieces of the puzzle come together with other legislative pieces that are trying to come through?
Yeah. I can see exactly what you're saying. I'll give you another example. This is a bit of a tangent, but I was pulled over in a truck out at Cunnamulla, which is way west, for anybody else listening, is way west of Brisbane, like 800 kilometres or something west of Brisbane, in the middle of the night, and it was a roadblock, and we were asked for our papers, and I was a passenger in the truck, and I was asked for identification, and so I started questioning them, and we went all the way up to an acting commissioner, and I found the legislation which says that if they're going to have a roadblock, they've got to have somebody that they're specifically looking for. They can't just go hunting for people who have got warrants on them or something like that. And I think you'll find it'll be the same in pretty much every other state, because usually the legislation follows equity or the common law, So they just can't take our rights away from us like that, but they will try and get away with it. And I suspect that that's what this is about. They know what they can do and what they can't do. They're trying to get away with it, and maybe they got caught out and suddenly they had a bit of a backswing. I can understand what John's saying. He's very cynical about it, with very good reason. We're cynical about a lot of things that come up in the news, so I can understand his point of view. I think on this occasion they got caught with their pants down, and they had to bow to the pressure. Now, whether they'll come back, I suspect they'll come back just as strong again, and they'll probably do it, from a tangent. They'll come at it from a different angle, trying to get the same powers back again. But anyway, I think we've probably spent enough time on it anyway. Have you got any more comments on it, fellas?
Well, I'll see if John's got anything to add.
Yeah, I'll have to go and check this one out. And I mean, just one more question about it though. Was this getting coverage on the 6 p.m. news? Like, was it being presented as a win by the people? How did the 6 p.m. news cover this one?
From what I recall, there was a number of other protests that were happening around the country with like Reclaim Australia nonsense again, and they sort of just focused on the Reclaim Australia divisive methods again, and then sort of just mentioned it at the end about this border force that was happening. I don't recall seeing it in depth on the 6 p.m. bulletin at all, but again, it was all over social media. It was the hottest topic of the weekend that was happening, and as it said, Green senators, MPs, everyone were rallying people to get out, and it was only a small group, but it seemed that for now regardless of whether it was controlled or whether it was an authentic protest, you can see that this border force so far has been put to a stop, John.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I'll have to go and look into it. But we might as well move on to the international segment now. And the first topic is to do with New Zealand introducing new national security provisions, Ethan.
This again follows on from, we started with regional police, and then we went to more of a federal sort of level. Now we're going to sort of an international, oceanic level, and our brothers and sisters just across the sea, there seems to be an increasingly high amount of articles that we're including on this show as of late due to the nature and the governance of the environment that they're in over there. For example, we mentioned how New Zealand is one of the most monitored countries in the world. We also touched on workers being fired for not taking vaccinations. And this week, there is another story that has to do with national security in their country. So I've got an article from scoop.co.nz who reposted a press release from the New Zealand Law Society on August 25th in an article entitled "Late Edition of National Security Provisions a Concern." Quote, "The New Zealand Law Society has expressed its significant concerns at last-minute addition to the Health and Safety Reform Bill of provisions for a closed material procedure for court proceedings where national security is involved. The Law Society has written to the Minister of Workplace Relations and Safety saying the provisions should not have been inserted at this late stage of the legislative process. The provisions will allow a person to be tried and convicted of a criminal offence without seeing all the information relied on by the Crown and without the right to be present or to have their representative present during the proceedings." So just think about that. "This is inconsistent with the fundamental right to a fair trial," the Law Society said. Quote, "We recommend the removal of provisions from the bill to await the outcome of an inquiry the Law Commission is carrying out on national security information in proceedings," Law Society President Chris Moore says. "The Law Commission has already identified significant issues about the matters covered by provisions which have been inserted in the bill, and it does not appear that these have been taken into account." Quote, "The processes inserted in Schedule 2A directly impact on very significant constitutional rights. Because Schedule 2A was not in the bill when introduced, it has not been subject to the Bill of Rights vetting process and will miss public consultation and input." Mr. Moore says, "It appears that the government advisors believe there would be relatively few circumstances where secure handling of classified information would be needed as part of any health and safety investigation or legal proceedings where national security is involved." And the article continues on. It's quite a lengthy article, so I'll just end it there. But essentially, what we're seeing here is for health and safety and/or national security in New Zealand, new provisions have been added to their anti-terrorism legislation, their national security legislation, to make it that you don't have to be present at a trial against you, and you don't even have to have a representative present at the legal proceedings. It's going to be decided in secret. They have the right to provide that in secret. And here we have backlash from the New Zealand Law Society saying this is completely against human rights. This is what we see in movies and what we see in military courts where it's just handled by a few elites. So it's a very concerning thing. And New Zealand obviously is already the most monitored country in the world, and there's a lot of problems happening on over there. And Lindsay, we covered our anti-terrorism legislation here on the show, and even they don't go to an extent to say that we don't have trials. I've got a book entitled "Inside Australia's Terrorism Trials," and it details all of the trials from 9/11 and what has happened in those trials. And even they don't get to the levels that they're trying to introduce here in New Zealand. And their justification, Lindsay, is that they don't expect to have many cases, so it's not that bad of a thing because they don't expect to have many circumstances where this could be used, which, when you think about it, that language is just completely Orwellian, you know what I mean? It's completely broad, not justified. So I'll throw it over to you first to get your thoughts on the legislation that is being, the amendments that are being put, the provisions rather, into this legislation and how it relates to this global crack down on so-called anti-terrorism, Lindsay?
Yeah, my take on it was that I listened to an interview with Gerald Salente during the week, and his big thing was that all the elites are running for the hills and running for the underground tunnels, and a lot of them are coming to New Zealand. And when you were reading that, I thought, oh, well, they're just clearing the decks for their people to arrive in New Zealand, so they can deal with, you know, whatever problems they have. I'm probably being a bit exaggerating, but it's just, it is almost like it's somebody with an awful lot of power is just riding roughshod over everything. That's my reaction to it. How can you not have a trial? I mean, even the Star Chambers didn't quite go to that extent. So I don't know what to make of this. Maybe there'll be some New Zealanders who'll finally stand up and put a stop to this too. I don't know. I'm sort of a little bit bewildered by where it's all going and why it should be so strong there as opposed to us. I mean, we're already railing against it and thinking, you know, we're hard done by. Anyway, I'll leave it at that and see what you've got to say.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how we've been doing this show for almost a year, you know, coming on 10, 11 months now, and even in that time, this whole new wave of terrorism hysteria and anti-terrorism nonsense around the world has really gripped on a global level. You know, in Canada, they've introduced legislation to combat these things. In Europe, there's similar things. I did a feature piece on Spain's gag laws, which are completely draconian in their nature. Here at home, we've got 3 tranches of legislation that went through, with metadata legislation set to come in on October 6th. All of this nonsense that is happening as a justification to protect us from these big bad boogeymen that don't exist. And this case in New Zealand was a fascinating one, because they really are accelerating with whatever they're trying to do, because it's coming out of nowhere. And the problem is that if there is any New Zealand brothers and sisters listening to this, use our country as a precedent when trying to fight back against these legislative pieces. What happened in this country was our Senate, it was rushed through our Senate with little to no debate at all about the provisions, etc., and there was almost no media coverage. And you know, I recall the second piece of legislation went through without even us predicting it here on the show that it was going to be that soon. I'd just broken it down the week before pretty much, and then it just gets rushed through our Senate. So if you're dealing with that over there in New Zealand, you know, you have time to use us as a precedent and spread the word and know the tactics that they're going to use in your parliament to get it through, such as votes in the nighttime. You know, contact your MPs, tell them that to show up to the votes, tell them that you care about this in the community, because these are the things that are really going to make the difference. Don't let them just throw in provisions like this at the last minute before it's getting introduced and be accepted about that. You know, I still do think on a grassroots level, if you speak to your local MP and tell them that you're going to be fed up by that, it could make a difference. And I'm just here trying to offer solutions. It may not work, but what happened with us was it didn't work just speaking about it. We had to take action, and unfortunately there wasn't enough time to take action because they rushed it through. So if you still have a chance over there, you know, take some action against it. And Lindsay, you know, you've been involved with local MPs for various issues. Do you get the sort of angle that I'm coming from here, whereas most of them might not even know about this legislation because it takes place during the early hours of the morning on most cases?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I don't know. I'm a bit cynical about local MPs anyway, about how much they know about what's going on. I think their first priority is looking at how much money they're making and how much travel allowance and all that sort of thing. I know that sounds cynical, but I don't think it's all that far from the truth. And as far as the legislation, I think they just do as they're told. We've talked about this before, about, you know, this forcing them, having whips forcing them to do what they're supposed to do for the party's sake. I am a bit cynical about how smart they are, some of them. But anyway, I know that we were saved from that. You know, there was legislation going to be passed between New Zealand and Australia to put a stop to a lot of alternative medicine, alternative like vitamins and all sorts of other things. And it was the New Zealanders who actually pulled the plug on that. because they did protest and they overthrew the legislation in New Zealand. So I've got a lot of faith in the New Zealanders, once they're aware of what's going on and how it's going to affect them, that they can have a fairly strong effect upon their politicians, maybe even more than what we can. So I'm hoping that there'll be somebody in New Zealand listening, and they might get their finger out and do something about it.
Yeah, that's right, Lindsay, and that's all I'm trying to speak about with this story. And a lot of people, I shared it on Facebook, a lot of people in New Zealand hadn't even heard of this legislation, and that was the frightening thing. So if there are people in New Zealand listening to this show, or if you know people that have family in New Zealand, etc., you're potentially facing a scenario where this broad definition of terrorism, which, as we've said before, is going to be flipped to include people that question the system. If you're charged under that, you won't even get to stand trial and be present at the trial or have a representative present at the trial. It's going to be all done in secret, and this is draconian. This is stuff that we see out of military courts and all of these secret courts that we do have all around the world. So just to offer some sort of a solution, because it is a troubling story, but we can put a positive spin on it, as in that they're not through yet. Because, John, as we've seen from our pieces of legislation, once they get through, they can be amended and they can have all of these added terms and conditions, and all of this nonsense can be added once it's in. It's only the stepping stone for even greater measures once it gets through. So you need to stop it in advance, John.
Well, we've got more than 50 people watching live right now. Thanks to everybody for joining us. And in the live chat, Minion1 says, thanks for the heads up, he didn't know. So we do have some international listeners. We've got some New Zealanders watching the show, so Minion can go and check that out for himself. And of course, all of the links are there at AusRoundtable.com, so if you want any information, you can check it out there. We ought to move on to the second topic for international today, and that is to do with Facebook claiming to have reached 1 billion users, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks for that. This is on page 28 on the 29th of August. And it said just that. The headline said, Facebook hits 1 billion mark. Now, I'll just read a small quote from it. For the first time since the social network exploded onto the world scene, Facebook has reached 1 billion users logged in on a single day. Writing on his profile wall, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg proudly announced that, quote, 1 in 7 people on Earth use Facebook to connect to friends and families on Monday, end of quote. And in your introduction earlier on, you were a bit cynical about this. How can we believe that this is true? And I tend to agree with you. When we were coming on the show, we were on Skype, and I noticed that they were claiming to have 54 million people using Skype at that particular time. So even if you expand that over a whole day, they're still not getting 1 billion people. So, I am a little bit suspect about the figure. But anyway, that's what they're claiming. My other point about it was that even if it's not 1 billion, even if it's like a few million, it's still a worrying thing to me that so many people are willing to put everything they know about themselves on Facebook. I'm going on holidays. I'll be away for 3 weeks. Oh, thanks. We'll come and rob your house. This sort of nonsense. And I know there are a lot of benefits from Facebook. People find there are lots and lots of benefits. But to me, the drawbacks are just not worth it. It's like I said before about getting the coppers. Oh, we'll get the cops into the house to help me. No, you're liable to get shot. It's the same to me. Facebook's no different. Just stay away from it. That's my attitude to it. So anyway, I'll see what Ethan has to say first of all, because you're a bit of a Facebook user, I think, aren't you? For the things you do in your life. How do you reconcile all this, and what's your feelings on it?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And the reason I wanted to put this in the show was just to expand, and obviously we know that Facebook, the majority, like there could be 1 billion accounts, but it doesn't represent 1 billion people, if that makes sense. But they could still use that as a loophole as a private company to get more funding, etc., etc. Because we know there's an algorithm on Facebook where if you pay to promote your stuff to be seen by the news feed, the way that Facebook compensates you is your page is going to go up in likes, so then you go, oh, it's reaching people, and then you pay more and they're making more money. But what people don't know is it's feeding you fake accounts that Facebook has registered or inactive accounts, and it's making them like your page. They could be from all different countries all over the world that haven't been on Facebook in 10 years, you know what I mean? And because of that, then your audience grows, your reach, which is already suppressed, becomes lower, and then you can't reach any more people. So using that as an example with the fake accounts, in relation to this story, I can see how there may be 1 billion accounts, but it doesn't represent, I've got 5 or 6 Facebook accounts that I do all different sort of things on because I separate things in my life, but that's sort of an example. But the reason I wanted you to put this in, Lindsay, is because just the very notion that Facebook reaches 1 billion people, the way that they would report on this is to assert that Facebook is a go-to site. Facebook is the thing. Facebook is a centralized part of a social life. Look, there's 1 billion people on Facebook. The whole world is on Facebook. Now they've got websites where they're trying to get, you can donate money, and they're trying to get it out to secluded, African tribes and all of this nonsense. Internet.org, I think it is. It's all of this rubbish that they've introduced, and because of this article, people think it's the way to go, and more people will sign up. And I've spoken previously on the show about how much Facebook is moving to control the flow of information, how they're moving to control the flow of news by internalizing news websites, and then, because they're already linked with other websites, how it could gradually make Facebook a central hub for everything that you get while it suppresses other websites. And that's why I wanted you to bring up this topic, Lindsay, because yes, there are a lot of people on Facebook, but I see it as media manipulation, as in they're going to put this story out there to encourage non-users to get on there, because eventually they're going to enforce a control of information and news, Lindsay.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is this idea that Mark Zuckerberg is actually a blood relative of the Rockefellers. Now, I don't know whether you've seen that claim. I saw that recently, and I thought, oh, right, well, that could explain an awful lot about this thing that suddenly just sprung up out of nowhere and was just a miracle. Well, maybe it wasn't just a miracle. Maybe it had a huge amount of money behind it for a specific purpose. That's my comment on it. But that's all I had to say. I'll see what Jono's got to turn up on all this.
Well, I guess there's a couple of issues here. The first one is the story claiming that Facebook has 1 billion users, and I don't think anyone on this panel and any of the listeners will simply believe that there's 1 billion Facebook users because Facebook claims they have 1 billion users. I mean, that just seems to me a ridiculous claim. Then there's the broader topic of Facebook in general, and Lindsay, you said that you're against it, you don't use it. I don't personally use Facebook. I did years ago, and I got over it pretty quickly, and I don't have a Facebook account anymore. And I understand people like Ethan have to use, they feel that they can use Facebook to get their message out to more people. I understand that I can see why. If people think there's more benefits than there are costs associated with using it, then fair enough, that's up to them. But for me personally, no, I've got no interest in using Facebook at all. And so what happens now is that every time I speak to someone from back in Melbourne, they know so much about each other's lives because they're all intertwined on Facebook, that when I find out that someone has had a child or someone's got married, this is big news to me. But to other people, it's they just know what everyone's doing now. They know each other's the big events of each other's lives just through the process of using Facebook, and I'm completely out of the loop, but I'm comfortable with that. I prefer it this way. I can't imagine. It's hard for me to remember back to the days when I did used to have a Facebook. I mean, it just seems absurd that you would have that kind of constant monitoring of each other's lives, in a personal sense. Putting aside whether Facebook is used by the spaghetti alphabet agencies to monitor us, I just mean from a personal perspective, the way that we lead our lives. What kind of a person wants to always know what everybody else is doing and wants everybody else to know what they're doing with their lives? It just seems ridiculous to me. And I'm sure many listeners who are listening right now have Facebook accounts and they enjoy it. And I'm not having a go at you guys. I'm just sharing with you my opinion. My opinion is to constantly know when each other is going on holidays, or knowing through a friend of a friend of a friend that someone's having a child or whatever. I cannot see how anyone would think that could possibly be healthy for you. Whether you believe in evolution or you believe in creationism, how do you believe that humans are supposed to constantly know what each other is doing with their lives? To the point of to the point where someone like me who's out of the loop seems weird because he doesn't know what everyone's doing. No, I don't know what everyone's doing down there. What kind of a messed up world is it, where people are all that interconnected? I'm quite happy to be on the fringe on this one, Ethan.
Yeah, that's right, John, and you make some good points there. In relation to, that's how dependent people have become with Facebook for their social interactions and their social lives. Facebook has become a hub of everyone's everyday interactions, and you're a perfect example of seeing that from an outside perspective. And we didn't really have much to expand on with the Facebook article, but I just wanted to throw it in for a general discussion because, yeah, it is becoming something that everyone does need nowadays. If you're trying to get a job, you have to, especially in journalism, you have to have a Facebook, etc., to do this and that. And most websites, actually, people don't know that the cookies still track you if you're logged in on Facebook, because Facebook is integrated with so many other sites. You'll see Facebook like buttons on various websites, like this on Facebook. There's bank accounts, PayPal, all of this stuff where you can just sign in with Facebook rather than creating an account on said website, and it just gets permission to get all of your information from Facebook. And the second issue is in relation to knowing everyone and what everyone's doing. Yeah, that's exactly what Facebook was created for. It was funded with backdoors to all of these CIA spaghetti alphabet companies that were funding it at the time, and they got it widespread. And they said, well, what better way to know what people are doing online than for them to just tell us ourselves? On there you have to put in your verified name, family members, all of this stuff, photos, you can tag locations, you can even say what mood you're in at the time, and they can modify the news feed based on that. So this is the scary world that we're living in today, and it may not be close to 1 billion, but it is close to a large number of people that rely on Facebook for everyday life, and that's concerning because from this dependence that has been developed, as we've just discussed, they're going to take it more further. We know that majority of news traffic comes from social media. The next step is to internalize the news, and Facebook's going to keep growing and growing and growing until you're going to have a Facebook account to access the internet, or you're going to have to pay to access Google and all of these sites. So that's the main premise that I wanted to get with people, was to just be aware of Facebook, understand the history of Facebook and where it's going, and go to AusRoundtable.com, put in Facebook in the search bar, and look at the previous episodes where we've gone through where they want to go with this, and just be cautious of your information at all times. If you can avoid to not use personal details, if you need to use Facebook, do that. Support alternative sites like informedplanet.org that are social media sites that have been mirrored like Facebook, but don't mine your data, etc., etc. So just to put a positive spin there on the end, Jono, just to encourage people to be vigilant and to move forward with more caution to what they reveal online.
Just before we do put a line under this topic, though, Ethan, can you foresee a time when you won't use Facebook at all for personal use? I mean, I understand you use it for getting top news and that kind of thing out there, but can you foresee a time when you will reject social media? Or because I mean, when I was in high school, MySpace was big, right? At the time, MySpace was much bigger than Facebook. It wasn't until my late teens, early 20s when Facebook took over. Now, I don't even know if MySpace still exists, but we were in high school before social media. My cohort, my age group, were in high school before social media even became a thing. Whereas I guess younger people now, they probably don't even remember a time when they didn't have a social media profile. So the idea of not having one probably seems just as crazy to them as the idea of having one seems to me now. Can you foresee a time when you will reject social media, or is it just part of your life forever now?
I think I try to avoid it as much as I can, but then again, I'm still on it quite frequently, and I don't know personally, I know that I could live without it, but I don't know if there will become a point where I won't have to do that, because I don't have a smartphone, I don't have all of these things, and a lot of people get in contact with me through Facebook specifically. So I've sort of been drawn into the trap where, I either have to go back to old ways and sort of distance myself from social groups, or I have to remain on Facebook and put up with that. I know I can live without it, but I'm just trying to give an example of how Facebook is really entering into the subconscious of people, and they don't even know it, John.
Yeah, fair enough, mate. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll move on to the third topic for international, and this is the Honourable Mentions segment, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, John. And As I mentioned last week, this is just including news stories that we can't really expand on greatly, or our position has been, already done, and we're just updating. And I still thought that there's a lot of important news that we can include on this show that we don't, because it can't take up a full segment time. So each week there'll be 3, 4, maybe 5 sort of articles that are there. But Lindsay, I know you've got a couple articles before I start that you wanted to read out as honourable mentions, just to go through them briefly, because they still are relevant and important to this week's news.
Yeah. I'll start first of all with one, and then we'll throw back to you. But I was interested to see they did a job on Mel Gibson this week in the Courier Mail. I don't know whether they did it in any other newspapers, but Mad Mel snaps at Snapper. Now, I'm not sure what the Snap business is. They got a thing about Snap this week, and basically they were just saying that he's done it again. He's showing a female photographer, and he's launching into a tirade of profanities in Sydney, and then later. That was on the 24th, and then on the 27th, they've got the same Gibson girl snubs cops in snapper attack row, and apparently his girlfriend refused to give an interview with the police when requested. There's not much here. The only comment I had on it was that he got himself into a lot of strife with the Jews in Hollywood, and I don't think they ever forgive and ever forget, and I think he ought to remember that and realise what's going on here. Anyway, I'll throw that back to you, Ethan, and see whether you've got anything else to put in honourable mentions.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And obviously, all the links will be at ausroundtable.com for you to check these stories out. I've got 4 links here that I thought were honourable mentions this week, and I'll throw the first one over to you, Lindsay, then I'll throw the third over to Jono to see what he thinks. But the first one was the financial situation that happened this week, which was the Chinese stock fell thousands of points not too long after our last broadcast, and subsequently the Australian stock market lost $60 billion, which was causing media storm across the world. There was live updates and everything else. The market was able to recover somewhat as investors sort of rallied, trading for big companies, etc., etc. But Lindsay, did you see this through the week? Because it was very interesting. We spoke last week about how the economy is going in a certain direction, and just to update again, there was another event this week. Did you see it?
Yeah. I saw it all, and because I get an economic report or whatever from a group in America each day, so they're full of this sort of stuff, both in Australia and in China and in America, and you get different takes from different people who write for them. So I've seen it, and once again, I think Silver Slave was talking about this earlier in the piece. You were mentioning it. That there's so many different takes on this, and there's so much being combined. About where it's going to go and what's going to happen. Like, I get some people who say, yes, there's going to be a major fall, and then it's going to take off again as money comes out of Europe and floods into the US. There'll be like a flight of capital from Europe, which will be going bad politically, and it'll go into the US, and the US market will take off again, and things like this. There's just, everybody's got an opinion on this. I'm pretty much going to sit back and just ride it out, I think, at the moment. I know other people think the whole world's going to collapse around their ears, and they're all out there prepping and all that sort of thing, for a disaster. And like I said about Salente, he was saying that all the elites are already running for cover in all their underground bunkers and what have you. Who do you believe in this? And we've talked about it before. A lot of this is just fear porn, and it is a worry to me. I was talking to somebody else here just during the week about this, who was asking me about it. Why did anybody want to ask me about it? And I said to him, it's all very well and good to have a food store, but as an individual, what happens with the kids next door are starving? Are you going to sit on your food stock while you see somebody else's kids die? We've got to start to think more as helping each other, rather than this sort of just prepping for myself business. So there's a fair bit, and I'll leave it at that. See what you fellas are going to say.
Yeah, Lindsay, it's interesting, and that's why I put it in the honourable mentions section, because our positions have already been set in stone. My position is there's a incremental collapse that's going to come through destabilization. It's going to lead to a cashless society. I think we're starting to see the minute beginnings of that. I don't think it's going to be as soon as some other people say. You know, Lindsay, you've said that I don't want to speak for the other two guys, but, you know, you've said you're sort of on the fence. There's good information all over the place. John's a bit more skeptical, and even if there was a collapse coming, you know, why would you worry about it, et cetera, et cetera. So our positions are already set in stone. That's why I include in the honourable mentions, because we don't really have much to expand on if we include it as a segment, because it's just a constant update. But you know, I'll throw it to John, because I did speak for him there. But collapse through the week. I know I sent you the link, and you know, it's just updating to see where things are going to go, John.
Yeah, I'm not sure that my position on anything is set in stone. It's just that I want evidence before I believe something, and there are people out there who want me to believe that there's an economic collapse coming and that there's going to be turmoil and anarchy and doom and gloom and all this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, well, that's possible, but where's actual evidence from it? And then they say to me, well, look, you know, the stock market is collapsing. And I say, collapsing? How much has it gone down? 5%? 10%? And they're like, yeah, but it's going to go down more. And I'm like, you don't know that. I mean, all of this stuff going back to 2007 with the GFC, it's all just make-believe money in the first place. You know, like we're talking about the stock market, right? The stocks. What do you use to buy stocks? Well, you use the make-believe money. And who prints the make-believe money? Well, the same people at the top. So if there's more money, if there's less money, if the stocks are going up or going down, it's up to them. So to believe that there's a stock market collapse around the corner, that you have to then think through, well, is it a collapse that the powers that be want or that they don't want? And if it's one that they don't want, then they'll stop it. And if it's one that they do want, then it's just going to be make-believe like everything else. So what's the deal with the fear porn? And I've said this before. I used to follow Zero Hedge, and I used to read every comment on some of their articles, and I was right into all of that stuff. But now I'm sitting here thinking, well, hold on. Where's the actual evidence, and how much of it is just fear porn? You give me actual evidence that there is a genuine collapse, like the kind of collapse that these people imagine in their minds. Sure, I'll believe that. My position on this isn't set in stone. My position is I'll believe what's based on the evidence, and the evidence to me is that it's all controlled by the same people, and they'll get whatever outcome they want, and what we read about in the newspaper is just what they want us to read about. I mean, does that kind of make sense?
Sure does, and that's why I said it's always good to have different perspectives on things, and that's why I included in honourable mentions, because, you know, it's the same stuff that we've said over and over. But you know, I'm going to keep updating just for people that might want to take the information and perceive it in the way that they want, you know, because that's all we try to do with the show, is provide a platform for information. And the update this week was more than $5 trillion has been wiped off global stocks within 2 weeks. So, you know, we'll keep you updated just to see what happens. The second one in honourable mentions was new NASA data that showed that polar ice is not receding. It was an article published in Forbes. It showed updated data from NASA revealing that Earth and their polar ice caps had not receded at all since they began measuring in 1979, and since the end of 2012, total polar ice extent has largely remained above what it was when they first begun. And the updated data essentially contradicted one of the most frequently asserted global warming claims, and that is that global warming is causing the polar ice to recede. So that was the second story. Even by their own official story, that satellites do detect these things, and, you know, we have our own personal opinions on that, but even by their own official stories, as you've seen by this article in Ford, which will be at AusRoundtable.com, global warming is not causing the polar ice to recede at all since they began monitoring. Now, the third article had to do with bikies, and I spoke about this week on Fair Dinkum Radio with Leon. We spoke about bikies, and according to the ABC, there are fears that the anti-bikie laws that have started in Queensland could be rolled out across Australia on a federal level for motorcycle clubs and outlaws, as they say that they are, but they're not really are. And experts are concerned that the laws will be rolled out across the country before they have been proven to work. Now, John, what we're seeing here is exactly what we predicted. That is, anti-association laws will eventually be led to a federal level. But this is happening even before there is an annual review to see if the Queensland laws work. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I'm interested if you have any thoughts to add to this development.
So the update is that they're now passing anti-association laws at a federal level here in Australia. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we spoke a couple of weeks ago that they're starting in South Australia, etc. The update here is that that experts are concerned, legal experts are concerned that it's going to be rolled out across Australia at this rapid level without it even being reviewed. So what they're saying is there's backlash this week because we haven't even tested to see if the laws work here in Queensland, yet they're being passed in South Australia, Victoria. It's expanding to a federal level, and that's what we predicted on the show, John.
Yeah, I mean, we started the show back in early October of last year, and since then so many of these laws have been passed, and I hadn't heard about this latest development, but it's not surprising. I mean, really what we're doing here is commenting on the rise of the police state, the totalitarian state. So each new development along the way doesn't come as a surprise to me. I don't really think anyone who's been following us would be surprised by any of this. We're kind of documenting the decline, if that makes sense. And well, like what we're talking about here really is just the laws of the, how do I put this? We were all born free people. It's only their laws that restrict that in the first place. So, like it's more corrupt on a fundamental level than just with each creeping bit of legislation. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, exactly right. And that's that's why I wanted to include it in this segment, because we're just constantly updating on stuff we've already spoken about on the show. And just be aware, people, that if it is coming to your state, you have the means to try and fight back against it, because the Queensland precedent has been set, it's ineffective, and they're going to try and expand this before there's a review here in Queensland to say that these laws do not work. So if you're in South Australia, if you're in these other states that they're trying to pass currently, and the other states that they're trying to get it in, use our state as a way to try and stop the legislation getting through, and using it as a discussion point to say, hang on a minute, it doesn't work in Queensland. So we'll keep you updated with that. And the fourth and final one was, as I mentioned, the proposed legislation that allows the government to strip dual citizens of individuals of their Australian citizenship has been deferred for a second time, which is great news after the lawyers said that they were unconstitutional and, quote, in no fit state to be passed. So that's it for this week, Jono, for honourable mentions. 4 stories there that will all be available at ausroundtable.com for you to go and look at yourself. And, there'll be more stories next week, hopefully, that we can touch base on just at the end of the show.
Well, I know that in the live chat, people have been talking about that Virginia shooting hoax, so I guess we can talk about that in the after show. But if that's it for the honourable mentions segment, we might as well wrap up the official show. So we'll go to you first there, Lindsay the Silver Fox. Any final thoughts for episode 47?
Yeah, look, can I just refer to another article? Just when you were talking about the polar ice not receding, there was an article in the Courier Mail on the 28th of August, and it was saying Nemo could move south as ocean temperatures rise. So and I thought, man, these people really are schizophrenic, aren't they? It's just, and they're talking about 13,000 ocean species that could be displaced globally and things like that. And I thought, man, what have we got to put up with here? Anyway, no, I haven't got anything more to add. I'll be interested to see where it goes after the official show finishes. And I thank everybody for listening.
Excellent stuff. And over to you there, Ethan Asher of TOTT News. Any final thoughts for the official upload for episode 47?
Yeah, thanks, Jono. I do want to apologise if my voice has deteriorated over the course of the show. I'm losing my voice here. I did mostly every segment today, and I didn't have water with me to try and cleanse the throat. But I apologise for that. I also wanted to state that I might have made a few claims that were pretty outlandish and pretty broad in relation to the police segment. That I just want to clarify now that if anything I did say was out of context, I will address it in the after show next week after I re-listen to the show. So just as, because I was speaking to Leon on Free Fair Income Radio, and then there's a lot of people in the Australian alternative media right now that are being having slander and defamation sort of lawsuits come against them because of some of the broad statements that they're making. So I realise I might have done that during the police segment. It's been a rough show to get through, so I apologise if I did that. And the final thought is, I did an interview again with Leon from fairincomerradio.com earlier this week, episode 648, I believe it was. If you head to fairincomerradio.com, we speak about globalization, about the move towards a cashless society, vaccinations, a whole range of topics. It was one of my favorite interviews that I've done to date for any sort of media outlet, and it was great to connect with a pioneer of Australian alternative media. It really was a great chat, so head to fairincomerradio.com, and I thank everyone for listening and tuning in this week, and I appreciate all of the support. Over to you, John.
Lawsuits, you say? Well, I knew this would come in handy, always reading out that views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel. It's finally come in handy, eh, Ethan? They slap you with a lawsuit. They're not coming for me, big boy. Anyway, I want to say thanks to the listeners. We've been doing this show now. This is actually our 50th episode because we did the 3 G20 specials, didn't we, back in November last year? So this is actually our 50th episode if you add them all up, but it's our 47th official. So we've been doing this for a long time now, and I want to say to listeners, if every now and then we have an episode where one of us seems flat or we don't have the usual perk that we do, hopefully they can forgive us for that. Thanks to all the live listeners for coming out. We've had more than 50 for most of the show, and we do appreciate everyone taking the time to join us. And if you are listening on MP3, I do apologise that it's taken me so long to upload the last few shows. I have just been so busy with all of the things that I do that I haven't gotten around to uploading the MP3s to our Podbean, but that will be happening over the next couple of days. So please forgive me if you've been waiting for those MP3s to come out. They will be up as soon as I can get them up there. But for the official show, again, we are sticking around for the after show, so live listeners stick around. But for the official upload, thank you for listening on the 30th of August, 2015 to episode 47. We'll be back next week from 3 p.m. Brisbane time for episode 48. We're fast approaching the end of our first season of the show, and we do appreciate the fact that so many of you now are tuning in every week. It means a lot to us. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you at 3 p.m. Brisbane time next week.